It would be understandable if someone had a great idea, and the personal self would then surmise that a great experience must follow, and thus agreement to such an idea makes sense. And this is where individuals who have a good grasp of this creational experience forging mechanic can deceive others, can present what seem on the surface to be great ideas, but which are under the marketed front anything but. If an individual wants to control another, or control an entire village through a teaching or other, for example, that if accepting will be most restricting, then it would be rather the task to get the villagers to agree with such an obviously restricting idea. The individual who wishes to exact control through this teaching, this idea, or whatever it may be, must have agreement, must have all the villagers agree with this idea, for it to feature in the experience of the villagers and the creator of the idea who wishes control. The idea will be laced with restrictive aspects. The teaching or idea will be such that to accept it will place the villagers under the control of this one individual. Maybe it is some distorted religious doctrine, perhaps along the notion of there may be being a forest god that has chosen an individual to be its go-between, and all must worship and obey him, so that the crops be fruitful, etc. The idea would of course be along the lines of surrendering control to one individual, to agree to being the subjects of control, and if one is controlled by another, then they are slaves. We have then a master and slave dynamic, a controller and the controlled. This idea will be most favourable to the individual wishing to have control of the villagers, and if this idea is agreed with by the villagers, then cause and effect will ensure that the nature of this idea becomes the overall experience. Agreement to an idea of control results in that very experience being so. The villagers would be subjugated by this one devious man. This is where the open suggestion of requesting that the villagers accept effectively slavery would be obviously met with laughter and dismissed. No villager would agree with this foolish notion, and so the idea never would become an experiential overall actuality. But as I ventured earlier, what if this idea of control was packaged in a marketed front of deception? How the crops might be more plentiful, how there is a tree god now in everyone's midst, and how this one individual is the chosen emissary of said tree god. Perhaps the villagers still would laugh, but maybe not, depending on the circumstances. What if this devious man secretly ruined the crops to try and sell his idea? What if he dressed up as a tree god and masqueraded as such to convince the villagers? As funny as this sounds, this is a standard for control systems throughout the creational simulator. Nothing can feature in the overall of a species' experience unless the overall agreement of the species is to the same idea in essence. To control a species, you must convince them to agree with the ideas of control. You must convince them somehow. You must trick them, deceive them, present your idea as a nicely packaged, beneficial idea, and supply evidence and verification of your claims. You must dress up as a tree god, ruin their crops, and claim that unless they agree to your position as the tree god emissary and all that that consists of, the crops will remain poor. Naturally, species subjugating others will generally be a little more sophisticated in their delivery, but the principles remain the same. The reptilians created religions for the same reasons. What seems a beneficial thing on the surface, that everyone will go to delightful heavens if they obey and kneel to gods, is simply an agreement to control, and as such an overall experience of being controlled by those who maintain and perpetuate the religious idea will be so. And like the added persuasive element of dressing up as a tree and spoiling the crops, well, the reptilians brought their technology to bear, easily impressing the early humans with their holograms and black magics, presenting themselves as thousands of feet in height, etc. Very easy to convince a technologically inferior species that you're a god when you make yourself appear to be as large as a mountain. And so we have then a world which is overall a controlled experience by the vast majority, controlled by a relative handful, made so by the overall agreement to ideas which are of control. All the main institutions and systems must be based then on ideas of control. Everything from politics to science to religion, as the main systems will be those mainly agreed with, or they could not feature in everyone's experience. And as the overall experience, shared by most, is of being effectively a restricted, controlled slave, then these main systems must be based on ideas of control. Just like our religious example and the tree god example, the systems must be packaged as though to present themselves as beneficial, or agreement could not be gleaned or maintained. Those that put forth the systems of the world must have had the intent and desire, the idea to control and perpetuate control of the human race. Scratch beneath the surface of the systems of the world, and they must actually be a master, slave, controller, and controlled dynamic idea, but marketed to look very fine to the masses. Consequently, agreement is extended, and the experience collectively had by everyone, the effect of agreeing to what is in fact an idea of control, will be an overall experience of restriction and subjugation, much to the bewilderment of the masses, who can't understand how a small handful of people can control them. For many are aware now that this is indeed the case, that a tiny percentage, 1%, controls the 99%, etc., and the next cause of action is to fight the oppressors, as though the knowledge of the situation and revolution will make a difference. The experience of suppression is due to agreement to it, or it couldn't be so. Everyone has decided this overall experience by agreeing with the idea, effectively, of 1% ruling the 99%. And yes, it was a deceptive ploy, but an agreement regardless. Nothing can feature in anyone's experience unless decided upon, unless agreed with. Effectively, the human race has made their own movie, their stage show, of being a suppressed species, and now they want to attack what is their own creation, their own movie. Maybe this might have an effect to a degree, but what must be realized is that unless the agreement to control is removed, then the experience, the effect of a controlled overall movie will be maintained. You might rally your forces and destroy and attack a few scenes in your movie not to your liking, but then the foundation of it is maintained, and in fact you will rebuild the same movie, because you still are agreeing with the idea of control that all the systems of the world represent, and so the overall experience of control, of the 1% ruling the 99% is maintained. The trick is then to walk around the movie, to stop agreeing with that which makes it so, to sever agreement to the ideas that culminate in the experience that is unfavourable. But we can see that we are not only the unconscious creators and conscious creators, but also subconscious creators, programmed and literalized and indoctrinated to agree with a system of endless lifetimes of slavery. For not only are we deceived into agreeing with ideas that look good on the surface, but with the advent of technology into the human experience, we are subliminally programmed into agreement also. The mind of the created vehicle will simply accept anything received, visual or auditory sources of information, and unless consciously disregarded, will be subconsciously taken on board. Anything then that bypasses the threshold of our visual and auditory senses cannot be considered, even if we wanted to. They nestle into our subconscious, and if not vetted, are effectively agreed with. Naturally then, if a reptilian species seeks to keep another species subjugated, agreed acquiescence will do very nicely. But with a species perhaps waking up to the control systems, then subliminally accepted ideas of control will be required and be just as effective. Anyway, back to where we began. There is a certain point where the consciousness of individuals becomes so, as they move through the various animal body forms, that they are granted free will, the free will to create, and utilize their body vehicle mechanics in this manner, through the cause and effect principle of the simulator. All individuals, in whatever body form they may have, will have the 5 bodies and the real self, overseeing the created self from the all is, the real universes beyond the created simulator. It seems as though the consciousness of an individual will develop at the pace of its choosing, and eventually expand to a point where it assumes the body form of a species that has free will as part of its make-up. In other words, up until this point, in animal forms, the individual will not be creating. It will not be forging endless ideas that form its experiences. Animals then, before the point of assuming a free will vehicle, will be in a state of awareness, the same state of being as the real self, with the is that oversees the created self. If nothing is created, nothing happens. The simulator remains empty, the screen blank. It needs the individuals to perform, the created vehicles to activate the cause and effect mechanics of the simulator, via the idea-generating faculties of the body vehicles.